Welcome to Rehash, a Web3 podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Rehash, a Web3 podcast. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and today for our final episode of Season 3, we're speaking with Henri Stern, co-founder and CEO of Privy, about Web3 as more than just financial infrastructure, whether or not privacy is a public good, and some of the trade-offs Henri envisions us having to make as we bring Web3 mainstream so that it can actually have an impact on privacy and ownership at large. But before we dive into our conversation with Henri, here's a quick word from the Web3 projects who helped make this season possible.
Web2 Social has become a world of walled gardens, where platforms own your data, your content, and your community. But Lens Protocol is a community garden, a user-owned, composable, and decentralized ecosystem designed to let Web3 social apps bloom. When you create content on Lens, you own it, you control it, you take it with you from app to app, and you decide how it's monetized. Instead of chasing ads and algorithms, you set the value of your work, and your community collects it directly from you. Here at Rehash, we'll be experimenting with this ourselves by posting all content from Season 3 on Lens, where our community can now truly interact and grow with us. So bring your photos and videos, your GMs, and your friends, and come join the new era of social media on Lens Protocol. Go to claim.lens.xyz to claim the last social media handle you'll ever need. And be sure to follow rehash.lens.
Contributing to a DAO can feel like this. Contributing to several DAOs can feel like this. But it doesn't have to. With Avenue, you can filter out the noise, get to know more DAOs, and start contributing right away. Avenue allows contributors to form organic teams to work together on the things they love. This means DAOs can operate, coordinate, and collaborate at a scale that used to be impossible. Because working together in a DAO should be like making music. The drummers drum, the singers sing, and when collaboration leads the way, a song emerges. No more relying on the core team to get things done. It's time to get your community contributing. To give your DAO the information they need to know, the tools they need to self-organize, and the spaces they need to work together, visit avenue.place.
Hey guys, thanks for hopping on here. I just wanted to touch base real quick.
What's up, Diane?
What's up? So first of all, I just wanted to say thanks, Tyler, for taking these meeting notes. They look great.
I didn't take those. I'll take credit for it, though.
Wait, that wasn't you? Do we know who it was? And who's been posting those hilarious meme videos on our Twitter?
Oh, I have no idea. There's a lot going on here, though. Like, how are we supposed to keep up with what everyone's doing?
I don't know. It feels like pure chaos being in a DAO sometimes. Ellie, what was that thing you were talking about that helps DAO contributors add and organize all of their contributions?
Oh yeah, it's called Govern. It's like GitHub for DAO contributors.
Ooh, that sounds cool. How does it actually work?
Yeah, so it's actually a protocol where DAO members can add any task they've completed as a contribution. And then their fellow DAO members can attest to them to confirm that those contributions were valid without the need for a core team to do so. What you end up with is a simple bottom-up way for members to build out the DAO's contribution graph themselves. It gives contributors more power and freedom, it makes it a lot easier to accurately reward everyone. DAO members actually own all of their contributions, so if they want to jump into another DAO, they can actually prove they know their stuff.
Okay, I'm sold. Can it be on chain?
Of course, but on Gnosis chain, so transactions are super cheap.
Ooh. All right, yeah, I'm down. Diane?
Yeah, for sure. Let's set it up. What's the link, Ellie?
Just go to govern.app, and that's govern without the E, so GOVRN.app.
Perfect. All right, well, if you guys got this, I gotta jump back to another call. Hey, Henri, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm very well. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. So for anybody who isn't familiar with your background, could you start off by just telling us a little bit about how you got to where you are, how you learned about crypto in the first place, and fill us in on what you're working on today?
Yes. So I'm originally French, but did a lot of my schooling in the US and basically got into computer science in college, and coming out of school, went through Y Combinator, started a company not at all related to crypto, and ended up going back to grad school to study. I wasn't sure what in computer science, but was lucky enough to go into a couple of this fellow called Dan Bonet's classes at Stanford, and was like, I need to take all of this guy's classes. As it were, he is a cryptographer, does a lot of computer security. And so I ended up doing a lot of computer security and distributed systems. So by and large, that's how I got into crypto, was going to get a PhD. And instead, one of my friends, Juan Benet from Protocol Labs, told me, listen, you should come here instead. You get to do research and actually ship projects. It's a lot better than just writing papers. I thought that was a convincing pitch. And so I spent the next few years of my life at Protocol Labs, which really cemented, I guess, my journey into Web3. So I've been in this space since 2017 or so, left after Protocol Labs launched Filecoin, specifically because I wanted to explore how do we make Web3 more accessible for more users? And how do we enable users to not just deal with on-chain data and financial data, but deal with real-world data, off-chain data in Web3 without compromising privacy?
That's so cool. I love how you got into this space through kind of like the base layer of what crypto is, right? I think even today, when a lot of people hear crypto, they just think of finance and they think of money, and that's sort of where it ends. But crypto is originally short for cryptography, not for cryptocurrency. And so I want to just go back to the basics and talk about what crypto really is and what it enables beyond just these financial use cases that most people think of. So could you, first of all, just start out by defining or by explaining in layman terms, in plain English, what is cryptography and what does it enable?
Yeah, please call me out, because I feel like, when I'm asked for plain English, I do end up going into the esoteric pretty quickly, which probably is a fatal Web3 flaw that we all share. So a great exercise. Cryptography is basically the use of mathematics to transform data. But the transformations are two ways in a sense, which is to say you can encrypt data and decrypt data. You can sort of encode data and decode data. And so what it allows you to do is share secrets over insecure channels. So this dates back to Roman times, where, say, you had certain ciphers. I mean, it dates back, I'm sure, farther than Roman times, but we have these cool ciphers that we know about from Roman times, where you wanted to send a message to, another phalanx somewhere else on the battlefield. You didn't know if the rider would get intercepted. And so you encrypted the code with some shared secret that all of the generals had before the battle started. And it carries through to powering most of the internet communications infrastructure that we have today. When you have that little lock on the top of your Chrome bar that says you're connected to HTTPS, that means that your files are being sent to and from the service that you're connected to using this protocol called TLS, which basically encrypts all of that content. So, say, Verizon can't actually read the data, say, that's showing our faces right now in the video stream.
Okay, interesting. So how does that then tie in with decentralization, which is the core of what we were talking about with Web3?
Yes. When I think of decentralization, I think of consensus. And consensus, distributed consensus, is this field. Again, I'm coming at this from a very academic computer science background, but distributed consensus is this field that dates back to the 70s and a really famous paper called Paxos, which is how do we get machines distributed along faulty channels to agree on the state of the world. So, example one might be, I'm running a data center. I have 1,000 computers running. And every now and then, one of the computers is going to fail and output a messy message, a lie. How do we still get everybody to agree on the state of the world in spite of the fact that every now and then one of my 1,000 computers might lie? So this is consensus, which is useful in distributed systems. But then we introduce the sort of next level of complexity, which is, what if the lie is not unintentional, with a computer failing, but what if actually I have malicious actors in the network? What if I'm dealing with economic agents who are all gunning for themselves? And how do I ensure basically that there's a shared state of the world across this system that has multiple economic actors? So to me, this is consensus. Consensus allows you to run decentralized systems, which is to say systems in which multiple parties that have no common interest are able to agree on the state of the world. And cryptography powers this because a lot of the basis for how these distributed parties communicate is built on cryptographic systems. So the earliest one is the proof of work in Bitcoin. Bitcoin basically achieves consensus amongst these parties by having them all solve the same mathematical problem, which is the proof of work. And so this is where crypto ties in. Basically, this ability to have multiple parties communicate is built on these shared secrets that they can use. So it's maybe the worst definition of this decentralization ever.
No, I thought that was great. And so that then leads us to thinking about cryptocurrency, a financial application of what you just talked about, because it seems like a very secure way to transact money, which is a very valuable thing for people.
So I might take it back a step, again, maybe as a purist. The money comes in because you need to incentivize parties to work together. And so how do you incentivize, you and I in a two-party system to actually agree to the state of the world when we have no reason to? There's zero things happening, in the real world to make us agree beyond what happens in the system. Well, the best way to do it that we found so far in any case is let's create a currency so that as we work towards the betterment of the global system, we both get rewarded with this money we created out of thin air. And so I think basically the currency part at first is really the backbone to this way in which we get to agree on truth. And then as it were, it actually ends up being a super robust, or I guess sound, monetary system that we can now play with in a natively digital way. And so from there on, it actually turns out to be great for financial applications. But upfront, the reason why we have money as part of this is because without a centralized party to govern the state of the world, without Facebook saying this is Diana's profile picture and I know it because she told me, but in fact you being able to attest in a system where there's no centralized source of truth to the fact that this is your picture, we need basically everybody to rally around a common shared interest, and that's the creation of these tokens that rewards everybody for participating in the system.
Okay, so I feel like you're getting into some other applications. First of all, very interesting. I got into this world of crypto and Web3 from, I guess you could say, more of a liberal arts side, whereas you come in from, the opposite side, a very technical computer science side. And so I think the way that I've sort of thought about cryptocurrency and how that came to be was completely fabricated in my own head and not at all what you just said. So it was interesting to hear the more factual way of how all of this came to be.
Well, and to be fair, I think, the real birth of crypto, I think, is Bitcoin. And Bitcoin as an application was meant to be a money system. So actually, I think we're both right, which is to say Bitcoin was created to solve the double spend problem. How do I ensure that payments are occurring only once in a distributed system? And as it happens, the tokens that are spent are also the tokens that power this consensus. So I'm choosing to focus on this question of coordination, which, ends up being really important, I think, for privacy. But at the end of the day, Bitcoin was really created to be a monetary system. So I think to start, you're completely right. This is a financial system. Bitcoin is a monetary ledger, and it keeps track of monetary transactions between parties. And then with Ethereum and other blockchains since, we've actually taken this forward where what you have is a distributed computer that can really encode any program, not just a very simple bookkeeping program, which is what Bitcoin encodes.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you've already mentioned, kind of a benefit of decentralization, which is the ability to achieve consensus without having a centralized entity, which may or may not be trustworthy. And I guess the underlying assumption there is that consensus is always more trustworthy and reliable solution than a potential centralized entity. Is that true to assume?
Sorry, I'm laughing because I'm known amongst my friends and teammates for being unbearably nuanced and refusing to give a straight yes or no. I think the short answer is yes, and actually I would refer anybody to a really awesome paper that's really easy to read, written by Vitalik Buterin, that's called On Trust, which kind of splits out. Here's why more people being brought in on agreeing to the state of a system is better. And you have different sizes of systems. You can have ones where you need N people to coordinate versus 2 people to coordinate and so on. But more is generally good. Obviously, though, it's a spectrum. And so what I would say is, yes, I think consensus-driven systems end up being more transparent because you need to have data be in the open in order for people to agree on the state of the world. However, there's all sorts of flavors of consensus. There's, stuff like federate consensus, the Facebook short-lived, I think, Diem or Libra, depending on what timeline you're on, was 21 parties handpicked by Facebook. And so in that case, it's not so different from potentially, the Twitter governance board that's picked by the board of directors, as opposed to, say, Bitcoin, which is completely permissionless, and then all the flavors in between. So I think the short answer is yes, but consensus has a cost, is the first thing. You were paying this out in tokens to secure the system. And, today it costs you on a bad day $100 to buy an NFT. So is it worth paying that cost is a very good question. And then what flavor of consensus are we talking about? And I think the space sometimes kind of lumps in decentralized or not decentralized as like just a binary statement, which it really isn't.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that. So, we've talked about decentralization a little bit from a monetary standpoint and why a decentralized system might be better for financial systems. But there are plenty of other applications for decentralization beyond just financial systems. Can you talk about some of the most compelling applications or use cases for decentralization that you've seen?
Yeah. So first, I think decentralization is fantastic for auditable systems. Any record of history is really, really useful. So, I think NFTs are interesting in their own right because provenance is fully public in a way that, say, it isn't in art. So any transactional system where history matters. So that might be the first broad category. I think the second is any system that's meant to be highly composable. Because the basis, the state of the world, the truth is open and transparent, anybody can build on top of it. And so I think for social networks, for gaming, this is huge because, if you look at really good games, World of Warcraft, Minecraft, all of these games, they have a ton of mods being built on top of them. This is fans going in and saying, I actually want to extend the game beyond its original thing and build out variations on it that I find really interesting. But the mods are always kind of second class citizens. Basically, because the game developer allows them, they get to exist. But the moment the developer chooses not to allow them, they will shut down. And so that obviously kind of limits what you can do to customize applications. Whereas in a distributed system, the core of the application is actually a public good. It belongs to everybody. And it is secured by like this token that everyone's paying for. But that means you can actually invest a lot more in building up on top of this game because you're not just kind of tilling someone else's soil. Maybe the problem with Facebook platform at one point was it was a great gaming ecosystem, but at the end of the day, you were always paying rent for Facebook to make money. And so I think, Zynga worked great for a time, but at some point it stopped. Whereas in these distributed systems, you can actually do much longer term investments into building out modular applications. So I think in gaming, we stand to see a lot of like new games being built because anybody can take a concept, run with it and extend the game and have a new branch of history, a new possibility for what a game can become.
Are there any examples or systems or use cases you can think of where decentralization might not be superior to having a centralized system?
Yeah, I think it's always a question of cost in a sense, which is to say, what are you optimizing for? Are you optimizing for transparency? Are you optimizing for modularity? Are you optimizing for privacy or efficiency? I think decentralization has a huge cost in terms of privacy and efficiency. In fact, that's why a lot of L2s exist. There's privacy-based L2s, there's state channels built for efficiency. But for any application that's very computationally heavy and in which the computation itself doesn't need to be known, transparency is costly without being advantageous. It slows down the system. It makes things more complex and harder to wield. And so I guess maybe my principle might be to reverse things on its head and not ask, what are the applications for which decentralization is good? But in fact, saying, when do you need decentralization? I would say by default, trusting a system is in a simpler state. And so we should default to trust and then choose the areas in which trust isn't enough and we need decentralized state to secure trust.
Interesting. Okay, so it sounds like you are overall bullish on decentralized systems. And I know from just your research, your previous talks and work, that you're also a big proponent of privacy. But you have said at some point, maybe not so explicitly, but that decentralization is bad for privacy. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, simply put, decentralization means having public state that anybody can reason about. I think the core purpose or the core gain you get from decentralization in some sense is transparency, is widespread availability of data. I don't want my private data to be in a channel that everybody can look at. And so I think insofar as privacy means my ability to control who gets to look at what, when, decentralization is at odds with that because decentralization actually says this data will always be available to anybody who asks for it. And so I actually think, in a sense, decentralization is great at censorship resistance, making sure no single party has control. Whereas privacy should be censorship driven, where I am able to control my data entirely. And so the two are definitely at odds with one another.
Okay, I want to back up for a second with privacy and just outline some of the problems we face with privacy in our current world, in the Web 2 world, before we dive into implications of privacy in the Web 3 world. So just to back up really quick and highlight some of the problems that we face with privacy in the Web 2 world, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges with privacy that we all experience today?
I'm going to try and go very concrete first, and then I'll go a little philosophical. So again, I'm operating off of this definition that privacy is my ability to control who knows what about me when. And I should have the ability to have very fine-grained permissions to, in the real world, I get to choose what I tell you. I get to choose how I tell you it. And for the most part, I am fairly confident that at any time you're not recording me and you might repeat it, but it won't be my words exactly. I think in digital transmissions, a lot of those guarantees go out the window. I'm basically, we have treated as consumers, in the name of simplicity, in the name of great UX, we've basically handed over data to centralized systems. Whenever I use a messaging service, whenever I DM you on Twitter, the people at Twitter can absolutely read my DMs. And so this simply means that, we have systems that I was referencing before, like TLS, that encrypts data end to end so that the communication is private between me and Twitter when I'm messaging you. But it's not private between me and you. And so these intermediaries are basically acting as the safeguards to our privacy and our communications, which is why, you have companies like Signal with ostensibly worse UX that are still working because they offer a different trade-off, which is to say better privacy at the cost of, some UX being annoying, like, for example, turning on a Signal client across multiple devices. But the short of it is the issue of privacy in Web 2 is, in order to make systems run well, they're run by centralized entities. And these entities decide what they want to deem as private or public. And unfortunately, government and the European Union, for example, has tried to do a lot around this with GDPR. But this ends up just being massively confusing and leading to more regulatory capture. Like GDPR has just made it harder for startups to compete instead of making it easier for citizens to control their data. And this is maybe the more philosophical point I'm getting to, which is, unfortunately, there isn't one size fits all to privacy. I'm an absolute tinfoil hat kind of person. So I'm not on Instagram. I'm not, on most social media, and I don't post photos of myself anywhere. But my definition of privacy is going to be very different from, say, an Instagram influencer who has deemed that this is part of their public persona that they want to put out. And I don't think either of us are more right or more wrong. We simply have different definitions of what feels like private and what doesn't. And so I think this is the difficulty for a lot of people building systems. I don't think Web 2, quote unquote, is evil in any way, shape, or form. I just think it's way too fucking hard to build a good system when you have to have a different size for every user that you take on. And this brings me to why Web 3 actually has a role to play here, but I'll stop for a second.
Yeah, I want to get into that, but one quick thing, because you mentioned a few times this trade-off between having good UX and having good privacy, is what you're saying essentially that you can't have both really good UX and also really high-level privacy, which then, leads me to think, is it true that you have to be a very tech-savvy person in order to protect yourself online?
Yes, I think that is true today. I think running a VPN is insanely hard. I think running an encrypted email service or using an encrypted email service is insanely hard. I think getting onto Signal is harder than, getting onto text messaging or WhatsApp. So the short answer is I think you have to be technically savvy to use private systems today. And for the most part, it's because the internet was never built to be sharing personal data. It was built to share like physics paper and like army information. And so it was meant to be a resilient system, not a consumer product or a consumer piece of infrastructure. There is a trade-off today between privacy and UX. And a really good example is, again, like mail servers. Gmail's awesome. Gmail works super fucking well. I can search any of my history from 4 years back and get a message like this. And, depending on how I feel about ads, I get actually served relevant content to me across my Chrome like history. Using a system that guarantees that no company can read my email means search becomes harder. It's probably localized on the client. Means I can't run my mail system with any sort of app on my phone. I have to pick the specific app that holds the keys to decrypt my data. And so, what I'm saying is the trade-off today exists because we haven't really built privacy first systems as a core competency on the internet. I think if you look back 20 years, the idea of Netflix being the share of internet traffic that it is, it's insane. The internet was never built to have such heavy bandwidth going through videos being streamed. But this is why, industries arose to meet that need with CDNs and, other parts that made it possible. And I think the same thing is true today, which is to say, we've never built sort of cryptography first, privacy enabled products as a prime citizen. And so frankly, the infrastructure sucks today, which makes it really hard to build without these trade-offs. But as we invest more and more, and crypto is a great place to do this, I suspect we'll see the trade-offs easing really, really well. And we'll start seeing sort of different privacy enabled systems arise.
Okay, so let's move on and talk about some of those. It definitely sounds to me like having a cryptography enabled system could be more secure and offer more privacy. But at the same time, we all know that blockchains are public by default, and we're all about transparency. So how do we square these two ideas of having privacy and being able to only share what we want while operating on a public by default system and valuing transparency at the highest level?
Maybe I would say, what is the single coolest thing that Web3 does? And I think it is enable large scale coordination. Again, I'm seeing things through a consensus lens. Consensus is a way for me to coordinate with other people on the state of the world. And basically, the way we bridge this gap is by doing more things off chain. So I think I see the chain, I see the public infrastructure, the transparent infrastructure that is the blockchain as sort of the lender of last resort of trust. It is the break glass in case of emergency thing that you go back to when you've reached unsolvable disagreement and you need a judge to come in and tell you the state of the world. But I think until then, a lot more should happen between parties negotiating amongst themselves. And again, just using the chain as a court. And so this is why I think cryptography plays a role here, is ultimately being able to adjudicate between people without it becoming a he says, she says in terms of information, means signing things. And this is where wallets and public key cryptography are so important. Crypto has given us the tools to start making sort of unfakeable statements as individual on the internet. So let's use a very simple example. I'm making it up on the fly, so let's see how it goes. But imagine I tell you a secret and I say you're not allowed to reveal this until a year from now. And then I hear about it somewhere in the world 6 months from now. And I go to this blockchain judge and I say, Diana cheated me. We had agreed, for $100 that she would keep this secret for a year. And the judge will say, well, prove it. Well, I can potentially show them a signed statement being like, here's the message where I told Diana, here's my secret. And here is the message she sent back to me, signed by her. No one else could have done it, proving that she would keep that secret for a year. And yet the secret is out there. And I urge anyone else I might have told this secret to speak up with this same secret signed by me in order to potentially, free Diana of any charge because I also told it to someone else, so it's my fault. And if no one speaks up, then we can assume it's Diana. So this is, I think, at a high level, how these distributed systems can work, where most of the interaction happens between you and I. In 99% of cases, we never have to use the blockchain to actually coordinate because things go well. But when something doesn't go well, we can actually refer back to this and have a sort of impartial agent dealing with the secret sharing that we were doing.
Okay, so how are these secret messages, encrypted secret messages, transmitted if not on the blockchain?
I'm trying to think of a good example, but basically, at a high level, the blockchain itself doesn't really hold all of the messages. The blockchain holds a stamp that says, here are all the messages. It's the Merkle root of a tree whose leaves are all the messages. So in a way, when I look at an Ethereum block, I don't actually see every transaction within it. I just see basically a unforgeable picture of these are all the transactions that made it into this block. But then I have to go to other parties to get the individual transactions. This is like data availability problems. So I guess my answer is this is already how it works today for the most part. And I think this is one of the confusions that people get into when they're like, is the system decentralized? We're never actually putting all that much content on chain because it's so expensive to do so. We're actually using the chain as the holder of, here is like all the messages that made it on. Basically, the core idea would be that the chain holds the title of the book instead of the entire book. So this is a bit of a convoluted analogy, but let's assume we both know what War and Peace is. Instead of putting every single word in War and Peace in the block, we're actually going to just put down War and Peace. And then we'll ask a friend off chain to give us the book if we want to refer back to page 22. And that's kind of how it works today. And so this is what I mean by a lot of activity happening off chain. And then the resulting agreement, the root of trust, making it on chain so that we can always use it as an arbiter in the end. And this is how all of these systems that are meant to make blockchains faster, the L2s, Arbitrum, I believe Polygon works in similar ways. All these sidechains and L2s work by actually aggregating content and then putting some root of trust on chain so that the chain is used less.
Gotcha. Okay. So in the example of, say, you're sending me a secret message and you're telling me to keep it secret for a year, it's really just that transaction. The fact that you sent me that message is kept on chain, but the message itself is not kept on chain. However, when we do interact on the blockchain, say like you send me some money on Ethereum, even though it's just that transaction hash that's stored on chain, everybody can still see how much money you sent me.
Yes.
So how do we make that information private?
Yes. And I would say there are probably two types of people working on data privacy in Web3 today. The first is these privacy blockchains. And so here, I think of Espresso, I think of Aztec, I think of Ironfish, all really cool projects that are trying to build some measure of privacy in these systems so that the amount of money I send you stays private. Some of them are looking at how to make sure this is also compliant and regulatorily palatable as well. But this is really about, in some sense, I would say economic freedom, because everyone knowing that we've transacted is already a loss of privacy. And then I would say there's the second type of people who are thinking about data privacy. And this is, I think, stems from the acknowledgement that privacy cannot be one size fits all. It's illusory to think of a system as private or not private, but rather systems have to be programmable. And we need to build systems for sharing information that will account for my preferences as well as yours. And so these are companies like Privy, like Ceramic, like Spruce, that are actually trying to build permissioning systems so that what's on chain is not the financial state of the world, but it's actually the state of my preferences. So I can say, when I use Diana's app, I actually grant Diana's app access to this information about me that it can use to carry out its services and give me the thing that I want. So, when I use Uber, I give it access to my contact books so I can tell people where I am in a ride, and I give it access to my location services. And right now that relationship is only between me and Uber. So when Uber abuses it, my recourse is directly. Whereas instead, having that system where my permissions, what I've given someone access to, and how long that access should last, lives in a decentralized system of record, is kind of the key of the second phase of privacy in Web3.
Okay, so can you give more of, I guess, a real life example of how somebody would use Privy to enable more privacy when they transact online?
Yes. So Privy is a library that is built for developers so they can onboard any user to Web3, no matter how technical the user is. So regardless of whether the user has a wallet or not, regardless of whether they are on mobile or desktop, we want to make it super, super easy for developers to build very friendly apps. So this means your users can sign in with email, with social logins, as well as with their wallets. And throughout, we're actually building out a system that allows users to give data permissions to the apps that use them so that users can continue to sort of control their data as they go through. So longer term, the idea is this. When I use Uber, Apple is sort of the custodian of trust. Apple is the one that allows me to share my location with Uber. And if I'm ever unhappy with the app, I can actually take my location back. The idea is to enable every app to have these sorts of controls. And so using Privy to, for example, share Ethereum addresses that I have, my name, my personal address, other things like this, my social identifiers, my Twitter username, so that a given app can actually build a really personalized experience for me. That's not just an on-chain experience where the app knows me as OX123, but instead it knows me as Henri Stern, someone who lives in New York who has these preferences. But the problem with the internet today is for every app that I share this data with, I'm giving them a fresh copy of the data. So if I use N apps, there's N versions of my personal data floating around the web. And so data breaches have a huge impact because basically my data is as insecure as the worst app I use. Using Privy, the goal is to make it that I'm actually not sharing a new copy with every app, but rather there remains one copy that I control that I'm giving every app access to. So this is the long-term vision for what we're doing. To be very clear, in the short term, our goal is to just make Web3 easier to use. We see this as the chicken and egg, which is to say Web3 has within it the tools that enable greater privacy. However, to start, in order to have an impact, in order to grow beyond financial use cases, it has to birth better user experiences. It has to birth really cool apps. It has to birth new social networks, new games. And that means making it easier for my mother or somebody who does not give a shit what Web3 is to actually get onboarded. And so a lot of our work is in actually just making it easier for developers to build good UX whilst using on-chain systems.
So kind of going back to that trade-off that you were talking about between UX and privacy, you guys are trying to get rid of that trade-off and enable good UX and good privacy for people at the same time.
And I think that means letting users do what they feel comfortable with. I think for us, it means saying, a lot of Web3 developers today don't want to touch user emails. They're like, this is private information. I can't look at an email. It tells me who the person is, and it does for the most part. But on the flip side, if let's say I'm using the Maker protocol and I'm about to get liquidated, wouldn't it be nice to get an email to tell me, by the way, you're about to lose all your funds unless you top up your service? Or if I make a loan to somebody and they pay me back, it'd be amazing to get, this is a very simple thing, but notifications are extremely broken in Web3. I think we have a pretty good notification protocol that is email, and we should be using it. However, it should not be a one-way door. In most of Web2 applications, once I've given you my data, it is yours and yours forever, and I'm no longer in control of it. And so I think our goal is to enable developers to build better UX, to not deal with the trade-offs of, I don't want to touch any user data, but to tell them you can't touch this user data because actually your user remains in charge of it, even as you touch it.
Got it. So the user can revoke those permissions at any time. I'm like, yeah, I want to get all these email notifications. That sounds great to me. I'm going to turn that on in my settings. And then I get spammed with notifications. I'm like, this is actually not helpful at all. I don't want this. I can just go ahead and turn that off.
Yeah, that's what we're building towards. To be very clear, today, what we're enabling is a better onboarding experience. So this is progressive onboarding. You can sign up with email, you can sign up with Twitter, and then connect a wallet as opposed to having a wallet from the get-go, which is insanely hard. We build really good wallet connectors so that developers don't have to worry about, but am I supporting wallet X on chain Y? Instead, we future-proof your auth so that you don't have to worry about supporting 18 different libraries, and you'll get to do it all through one. And then we give you a unified user object. That is to say, your user grows as they engage with your app. As you engage your user and more, the object that you're dealing with fills up. So you can build a more personalized experience. But as you said, where we're going is in actually making sure the user has a backstop so they can control this, which makes it easier for developer not to have to think about, regulatory compliance and all these other things as well.
Gotcha. So in the long run, do you see sort of Privy being the best kind of solution to user onboarding and privacy and ownership at the same time? Or is that sort of one option alongside some of the other options that you mentioned earlier?
Oh, I think it needs to be one option. Frankly, I think we will be the best, but that's because I'm operating with, my preference set of where I like the trade-offs made. I want to give, developers my email so they can tell me about stuff, or I want to make it that I'm able to link multiple wallets together. So when I go to an NFT app, I can see all of my assets across all of my wallets instead of being stuck on one that I have to keep logging out and logging back into. It's not a one size fits all. My sense is Privy is doing more work here and hopefully will help set standards in terms of what UX and Web3 can be and how we can enable the space to grow. And I think my hope is that a lot of other people will work alongside these standards. And a lot of people, again, that I've mentioned are already building out these standards. And we can build alternatives so that users and developers can kind of pick what's right for them. I don't think, unlike in Web2, this can be a one-size-fits-all kind of thing where Privy is the only party doing this. However, we're working hard to build the best UX that will work for the most number of users. And I think our core mission is to grow crypto so developers don't have to speak only to, the bleeding edge of technical users, but can actually onboard normal people who just want to have delightful apps.
Why do you think it is that Web3 apps so far have not had very good UX?
So I think part of this is if I look at an app like Uniswap and I compare it to, my Chase banking app, I would argue that Uniswap has baller UX. And so I think part of it is also we're in Web3. I think, for example, DeFi has really good UX. I think for the most part, a lot of NFT marketplaces have good UX. And by the way, this is to me the insane thing about NFT marketplaces that's like so cool is I get to connect to different marketplaces that operate with different rules. And my inventory is instantly with me everywhere I go. And I think this is the power of these decentralized systems is I don't have to like build up my identity and my data with each service provider that I have, but instead, imagine if the inventory I was selling on eBay was like immediately available on, GBay and HBay, who are like competitive products with different UIs, with different rules to like, fees that they take from sellers. We lose data lock-in. And so I think by definition, Web3 will have better products down the line because it can be a much more competitive space and there can be a lot more innovation. However, I think to date, wrangling basically on-chain data, wrangling wallets is so hard that most people get turned off on day one. And I think, frankly, developers are only just starting to scratch the surface of what are the types of experiences that we can build because they get stuck with that early step, which is I can't onboard users. We spoke with a company recently that was telling us about their numbers, and they were really impressive numbers for Web3, which is to say, they had a few thousand DAUs, which is awesome in Web3, and which is ridiculously small in Web2. And so I think the short of it is accessing on-chain data, interacting with wallets is so complex. Onboarding users into Web3 is so complex that we're not actually able to push product experiences far beyond it. The second reason, frankly, is I think there are probably too many people like me in Web3 who come at this from a very computer systems driven angle, who frankly love the underpinnings of the space. And I think we need more product designers coming from Web2. I mean, the goal at the end of the day is that we stop saying Web3 altogether. The term should be meaningless because every product should be built on hybrid stacks that include some sort of decentralized data and some centralized data. So I think we've won when Web3 means nothing to anyone anymore because most apps are built up of hybrid parts. And I think that means more people coming in who don't give a shit about the actual sort of underlying architecture. And this is kind of the risk, which is how do we grow Web3 without throwing away what makes it special?
Yeah, exactly. I think, the common thing that people say is that you shouldn't have to understand the technology that you're using. And it's like for me, for example, I took a coding bootcamp class a few years back just to sort of, learn Python, learn some basics of that. And the first class was just explaining how data is stored in the back end of the internet. And that's something that I had no idea about. I had never thought of it. I had never learned about it, had no idea, even though I was using the internet for years and decades before that. And I think that's probably the goal that we're striving for with Web3 as well, is that people don't have to understand blockchain. They don't have to understand what a Merkle tree is. They don't have to understand what a transaction hash is. These should all be irrelevant things for people, for just the average user of all of these apps.
And I think, frankly, there are probably two main threats for this. I completely agree with you. With that said, all blockchains are not created equal. All systems are not created equal. And you're signing up for something very different when you're using an L1, Ethereum-based app, and even a Arbitrum, Polygon, or now we move it to Solana, and potentially the long tail of shitcoins. I'm not saying Solana is one, but I'm just saying it's a spectrum of choices that you make. And because we complexify everything for I think most users, the difference between them isn't so clear. And because the space right now is very driven by financial speculation, how can I make a quick buck? That is the risk, I think, is that the systems that rise to the top aren't actually the ones that have optimal guarantees. That's risk number one. And I would say risk number two is crypto as a way to escape regulation. I think there's a reason why DeFi is probably the space that's seen the most innovation. And it's because it's the space that is hardest to play in centralized systems because of regulation. And I think, frankly, crypto needs better regulation, not more regulation, but better regulation, which is to say both, because otherwise there is a risk to users in that the apps that will most succeed will be the ones that are most seeking to avoid having to answer to consumers.
Yeah, we actually just had a conversation about this on the podcast a couple of episodes back with Sumeda Deshmukh from Crypto Council for Innovation. And she was sort of talking about that trade-off between regulation and innovation and how we can have both at the same time. which is the $1 million question. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts looking forward to the future. I guess timeline wise, when do you see crypto reaching the masses? When do you see crypto becoming as ubiquitous as the internet is? Everybody having a wallet, just like everybody has a Gmail account today. And then what does that future look like to you? Paint us kind of a high level picture of what that looks like.
The picture to me is of an internet that spawns more products working off of the same basis, where after Uber's come out, if I don't like the rating system for Ubers because 5 stars isn't good for me, I want a thumbs up or thumbs down, I can actually go on Gruber, and that is like an app that has the same driver network, but has a thumbs up and thumbs down rating system. And then I can go on Kid Uber, which is using a subset of the drivers that all have young children in car seats in their cars. They have young children, and separately they have car seats and they know how to take care of young kids. So I maybe can send, my son somewhere without worrying as much or something like that. But it's basically removing a lot of the moats that make traditional businesses very valuable, but also slow down our ability to try things out. So this internet is a lot more open. The way you make money is probably a little bit different, but you have a lot more services. With every good idea spawns 1,000 others. And that means the internet sort of has a flavor for everybody. And then for the most part, I would argue in this internet, people are generally a little bit less predatory because there's a lot more recourse for customers. So, my great evils in the world are Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, these credit bureaus that I never asked for anything from and who now fucking control my life in spite of the fact that I have no formal relationship with them. And the idea would be that any user in this world can actually sort of actively control what happens to their data, pull it out of a system. This reputation is seen by everybody. Now, most users, I think, will never care. And I think that's great. That's fine. You don't need to care about privacy if good defaults help protect you. But I think the rails of this internet being open enables there to potentially be a new class of professional come about, which is, maybe I'll call it the data custodian. And so I have my doctor, I have my lawyer, I have my shrink, I have my data custodian. And I tell my data custodian here, this is what I think of as privacy. This thing, not okay with me. This thing, okay with me. And from there on, my data custodian can, actually turns the knobs and twist the things. And I get a profile that follows me from app to app. That means that I can onboard into any product and the product's immediately good. I get onto a restaurant reservation app and the app already knows what I like. Everything is customized to me. The internet is mine. And yet I have this person that's looking out for me and turning the knobs and the things so that no more data than I want is being given out in order for me to get the services that I want. This is the long-term one. On this internet, I think transfer of data and transfer of money is very simple and very ubiquitous. And most of it is done from person to person, as opposed to being done through a third party, needing to wait, 4 days for Chase to clear my transaction and whatever else it is. I think the unlocks that get us there, I think it's really important that there's progress being made on the technical underpinnings here. I think, ZK proofs, I think some advances in cryptography and in distributed systems, it'll take us a long way. But when you squint, this world is going to be unlocked by a few major applications working, and that pulling the space in the direction that it has. So I think DeFi, for instance, has been sort of the tip of the spear in terms of the best consumer experiences in Web3. And unfortunately, it's made the space a lot more financial. Imagine if gaming had taken off instead of DeFi, we'd see probably a lot more creators in Web3. And so I think the path to getting there is going to be unlocked by which apps take off at what times. But ultimately, we're still in a world, I think, where there may be 5 or 10 really successful crypto apps. Everyone else is trying. I love that everyone is trying. We're trying. And we need to have more of these apps come and succeed in order to shape this world. Maybe the last thing I'll say is, when you say, when will crypto have gone mainstream? I think Coinbase has something like 103 million accounts. Is that mainstream? Yes or no? It's a really good question. I think crypto goes mainstream when half of the people are using a distributed system and don't know it. That's the key. I think crypto being used willingly, me saying, of course I trade on Coinbase, is not crypto being mainstream. It's crypto being crypto, which is to say, here's a financial application I can speculate on. And again, I think Coinbase has done a lot to unlock the space. But the moment we stop thinking of Web3 as main Web3 is the moment we start having mainstream crypto. And I think that gets unlocked by applications first.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly hope that we reach that time sooner than later.
I feel good about it being in our lifetime. I think there's really a question of like how far the applications go. And there's a world, frankly, where crypto remains infrastructure and financial services. And I certainly think a lot of crypto apps are better today than traditional financial apps. But obviously, we're all working, and Privy in particular is working to enable consumer experiences, to enable games, to enable services, to enable social networks to exist and to be delightful. And I think it'll come in the next few years. Frankly, maybe this is a hot take. I think the bear market does a lot to help with this broader adoption because the bull market is fed by speculation and frenzy. It helps grow the amount of money that's put into the space in order for people to innovate. But the innovation is all going towards the same applications, which are currently making money. In the bear market, there's a lot more soul searching. Why are we doing this? What are we doing this for? Shouldn't we go to AI? Look at how cool ChatGPT is. And I think the people who stick around and who build are actually going to broaden the sort of portfolio of things Web3 can change quite meaningfully. So, frankly, everything with FTX and with the current market is unbearably sad. And frankly, it's not that fun at times to work in Web3. But I also think this is where a lot of the meaningful changes that bring about this world come in. And my hope is that we're 1 or 2 winters away from it. So I think not only in our lifetime, but in the coming decade.
Awesome. I love that optimistic prediction, and being bullish on the bear is, or at least finding a silver lining there. Last thing, I know Privy is still sort of in the early days. It isn't full service and what you want it to be ultimately just yet. So in the meantime, what are the best privacy apps, or what are the best privacy practices that people should be incorporating into their daily digital routine?
It's a great question. To be clear, Privy is available now. So any developer can come on and
awesome.
use it.
Yeah.
We help you onboard your users, and it's quite simple to use. So hit us up. It's privy.io, and we'd love to help you get going so you can build better products in Web3. Beyond that, I would say twofold. I think the tip of the spear right now is wallets. I think getting used to different Web3 wallets is the place in which real user control is exerted. I also think the UX is pretty horrid. And so this is why we have some work to do. But I would say actually understanding, asking yourself, why am I being asked to sign something here, is a really good exercise for being more thoughtful around what data goes out when you're using the internet daily. To answer your question more directly, though, I would think downloading a very easy to use VPN, using that in public spaces, hotels, airports is a pretty good idea. I think using encrypted chat apps when it makes sense. But I think more importantly, this is why we're building developer tooling and not consumer applications. Frankly, I think privacy is a common good because it has to be sort of widely enforced, socially enforced in order for it to work. And this is why basically I think privacy will be solved by builders, by developers, building better defaults. Because ultimately, for most users, dealing with worse UX just isn't worth it. Most people don't have something specific to hide. And so chewing through glass to take measures in the name of an ideal, which is privacy, just doesn't make sense. And this is why I think people building tooling and people in the space should strive to build these systems so that the user doesn't actually have to think, what apps should I use to protect myself?
Absolutely. I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Henry, for taking the time to come on the podcast. And we end every episode with a fun little set of questions. Some are crypto related, some are just about your personal life. Not too personal, don't worry. Don't freak out about that. We won't invade your privacy in any way. But if you're cool with it, we'll end this episode with the same set of questions we've asked every other guest on the season. Yeah. Okay. Cool. It'll just take a few minutes. So the first one I have for you is, if you can brand anything in Web3 and it's guaranteed to stick, what would you like to rebrand?
I think rebranding a transaction would be huge impact, because transaction, for better or worse, it's a computer science term in some ways. It comes from the database world, but it carries with it huge financial connotations. And so being able to brand it differently, to an exchange or a system, an update or something like that would have a huge impact on how the space is perceived.
Oh, nice. I like that. Okay, second one. If you could wave a magic wand and any Web3 app, tool, or protocol would immediately exist, what would you want that to be?
I think a protocol that has all of my basic information and preferences and it allows me to share it selectively across the apps that I use, so that any developer could basically get started with an app and be able to tap into a global user network that means they have users from day one that they can build wonderful services from. I think, in a sense, this is the accelerant to every other app, but this piece of tooling would enable like an explosion of the available services that you have in Web3. And frankly, this is a lot of what the chain does. But that would be the app that I would want, some version of a personal data repository that protects me, but that I can use to get access to a lot more products.
Very cool. Okay, third question. If Privy were a famous person or animal or character from history or pop culture, who would Privy be?
It's a very good one.
I know this is kind of an out there question.
No, I love it. I think Privy being Dr. Watson from Sherlock Holmes would make a lot of sense. The ever-present sidekick who's there to help, to bring sort of users back, to protect them, and to ultimately give way to their creativity and everything else. I think that's probably the character I'd pick.
That's a fantastic answer. I love that. Okay, two more. These are non-crypto related. The first is, if you knew that you never had to work another day in your life, you were financially set for the rest of your life, what would you be doing with your life?
It's a very boring answer, but I'd probably be working on exactly what I'm working on. I think I've been lucky enough to be in this space for a long time, and have had many options of sort of getting out. And I still really believe in this. I think the internet's the single most important invention since the printing press, if not like much farther. And I think actually securing a better internet infrastructure moving forward, given how little yet we've seen this. It's been 40 years. What's going to happen in the next 400? And so, frankly, I can't really think of something I'd much want to do more in my life. I like the people in this space, and I like the mission of what we're working towards. So this is what I'd be doing.
Out of all the guests I asked this question to on the season of the podcast, I would say at least 80 or 90% of them had that same answer. They said I would be doing exactly what I'm doing now. And I'm not sure how to feel about it, because part of me is like, I'm really bullish on the enthusiasm in the space, especially in a bear market when sentiments are low, people are still this excited about what they're doing. On the other hand, I'm like, man, people in the space need to find some hobbies.
Well, maybe I'll tell you this: if I weren't allowed to do what I'm doing now, I think either opening an antique shop or opening like a cinema. I think there's a few really good movie theaters in New York and elsewhere that show sort of off movies from any time in history. I think being able to program a selection of movies from the last 100 years, actually running it, would be insanely fun. So those are probably the two things I do as my side hobbies or full time if I weren't able to do what I'm doing now.
Okay, see, that's the answer I was going for. That's the more interesting answer. And then last one for you, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live?
I love traveling. And so the honest answer is I am very happy to be able to pick 2 or 3 places. It feels insanely hard to pick just one. I've been lucky enough to spend the better part of 2018 in Nairobi in Kenya. And that was an unbelievable experience that I wouldn't trade for anything in the world. And so, give me a time span, which is to say, if you had to pick one place and one place only for the rest of your life, where would it be? But if it were, as a French person who's lived in the US for a while, what is the place that you would most want to have spent time living in? I actually think Nairobi's like such a vibrant city. The food's amazing. You're so close to like many different things and amazing places around the world. That's probably the place I pick.
So cool. That is a really cool answer. I love it. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Henri. That's all I have for you. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. This concludes season 3 of Rehash. We'll be back again in the new year with a new season of the podcast. I hope everybody has a very happy holidays. And if you are an NFT holder, make sure you stay tuned in January for the next round of guest nominations and voting, where you get to help choose our upcoming guest list for season 4 of the podcast. So thanks again so much to you, Henri. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we will be back again in the new year with more episodes of Rehash.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Rehash, a Web3 podcast. Henri Stern was nominated by Anastasia Uglova and voted onto the podcast by Anastasia, Ale Borda, and another anonymous DAO member. Some of the questions you heard were submitted by Karsten. Rehash is hosted by Diana Chen, produced and edited by Ellie Dots and Tyler Internet, sponsored by Lens, Avenue, and Govern, and as always, supported by Rehash DAO. To stay up to date on all things Rehash, you can follow us on Twitter @RehashWeb3, on Lens @rehash.lens, and join our Discord to get involved.